Hi, Claire and Mick. Good to see you. Thank you for agreeing to speak to us here in over the water, as you call it. You've got
Indeed.
lots. There's the European water, there's the Channel, and then there's the other one as well. So you're always over the water.
Well, we would be, yeah.
Now, look, I wanted to speak to you because, Claire, I saw a tweet that you put out here, and it says, I'd like to express my deepest sympathies and solidarity with Republicans living under British rule. The next few weeks will no doubt be difficult to bear, but it will pass. You're not alone. Your day will come. And I noticed that, and then you seem to have to do a follow-up tweet, which says many people across the water, indeed all over the former British Empire, support the idea of having a republic with an elected civilian head of state rather than a monarchy. To be absolutely clear, that is who is meant in this context. Now, why did you need to clarify that? I thought it was quite clear.
Well, there was a big debate around it, seemingly. I mean, as to what was a Republican, and was it an Irish Republican or a Scottish, Welsh, or whatever Republican when I referred to Republicans. But actually, what I meant was people who are against the monarchy, people who believe in an elected head of state, people who have been, I suppose, the victims of the British monarchy all around the globe, the victims of imperialism. But some people seem to think it was kind of like American Republicans or whatever as well. So our American audience got a bit confused about what Republican meant. I don't know if they thought we were
right. I get it. Right, I see.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, because we obviously get a lot of stuff about the Queen dying and Prince Charles becoming king and stuff. It's all over the place here, as you might guess. What do you think is the advantage of not having a monarchy? Because you don't have one now. I mean, Ireland's not had one for a while, but what do you think the great advantage is of not having a monarchy?
The advantages of not having one.
Not having one, yeah.
You tell me, what advantage would there be in having one?
I suppose first thing, well, you'd be saved from the tabloid stories about their horrible lives and their little tit for tat struggles between them morning, noon, and night. That'd be a good start. But look, the monarchy is obviously symbolic of, to me, colonialism and imperialism. It's not that you have to have a monarch to be imperialist or colonialist, but it is very much as an institution symbolic of same. I mean, look at, there has been, we even had in the European Parliament yesterday, there was commiserations, a minute's silence for the Queen. There was our Ursula von der Leyen told us she was a legend and all this kind of stuff. Like, you know, it's not personal. My own mother loved the Queen, thought she was great, couldn't believe how a woman of 96 could keep doing what she was doing. It's not personal. This is about the monarchy as an institution, which is unelected, it's colonialist and it's a massive drain to the taxpayer as well. I mean, British citizens are paying for these people to live their inflated lifestyle. And you hear all these stories about their good works and their charities. If they just folded them all up, went out and got a job, and were like everybody else and used the money then to develop the NHS or devise free transport or something, and they'd be doing an awful lot better, because they don't play any constructive role at all.
And I don't know whether you've seen the comment by Leo Varadkar in the Republic of Ireland when he was congratulating Charles on becoming king. I see a comment from a guy from, I think he's from Tipperary in Ireland, and he says, "My God, Varadkar must have changed his attitude. He's delighted now that someone at 73 years of age who's been on social welfare all his life has got a job at last."
But it does. I mean, because obviously Ireland's history is full of about the role of the monarchy and oppression of Irish people. Has Ireland in some way forgotten that history? Do you see that in the media there, or is it just a forgotten thing that the royal family were responsible for, like, the famine and stuff like that?
Well, listen, obviously, the mainstream media in Ireland would have liked to sort of blank out a lot of things that have gone on and still go on. So they like to whitewash a lot of history, and the same as they like to whitewash much of the disappointing things that still continue to happen. But if you think all the Irish people have forgotten their history, don't think so. And there was a very, I don't know if you saw the video from Shamrock Rovers soccer club in Dublin. They were playing a match that night, and you should check out the video. It got several million views, but they were coping very well with the passing of the Queen. And I don't think they've forgotten too much of their history.
I mean, I think like you got to look at the establishment reaction, and that would even include Sinn Féin, has been very muted. Like even in the European Parliament, when there was a minute's silence, myself and Mick, we didn't jeer or anything, but we sat down. We didn't stand up for the minute's silence, but actually Sinn Féin did, and everybody else in the Parliament did. I think we were the only ones who didn't, and it wasn't out of any disrespect for the Queen personally. She's an old lady, and when anybody dies, we feel sorry for their families on a human level. It's not about that, but it's about recognising what the monarchy as an institution meant in terms of British imperialism globally, not just in Ireland, but in India, and the horrors that were perpetrated. Now, do I think that Queen Elizabeth was personally responsible for all of that? No, but do I think that she comes from that tradition and that we need to take this opportunity to question the role of the monarchy? Then I think absolutely we do, because it has no place in a modern. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen yesterday was going on that the Queen stands in the greatest democratic traditions. Well, she's bloody unelected. The British taxpayer has to pay for it without having any choice. How is that democratic? And she's the right to dismiss the Australian Parliament if it suits her will, because they're her subjects or whatever. All this nonsense around the Commonwealth and stuff, that's just appalling stuff. Loyalties and oaths of allegiance and all this nonsense. It went out with the Dark Ages.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you heard the State of the Union address yesterday, but it was pretty mind-numbing. But Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, has been an incredible disappointment. And for her to describe the Queen as a legend probably wasn't that big a surprise to us. This is a woman that has put the living standards of the vast majority of European citizens in peril in order to support a US-NATO proxy war in Ukraine, and not really caring what it's going to cost us. We've imposed sanctions that are backfiring. We're looking at terrible increases in energy costs, cost of living costs across the board, commodity prices driving up the price of so many things. So we have a commission that is more in tune with serving the interest of US empire than it is in serving the interest of their own citizens. So for that same woman to describe the Queen as a legend wasn't that shocking, but I just hope she never describes me as a legend now.
Let's see, we safe enough. It'd be grand.
Well, that's sort of. I was going to say, it's part of this propaganda war against anyone who speaks out. I mean, and I've looked up again since we spoke a couple of months ago. They're still at it with you two, aren't they? I'll just bring this one on the screen. Is Clare Daly added to list of alleged Russian propagandists by Ukraine's security service. Now, following I've read more of the article, and it says at this point, it says Ms. Daly is being accused of sharing two narratives: that sanctions against Russia make innocent people suffer, and that the Ukrainian conflict is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. And for that, you are on a list of propagandists. I mean, it's a very sinister world we're in, that you could be labelled in that way and sort of smeared and put down in that way. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, isn't it just, I mean, if the Chinese authorities had drawn up a list of sort of international dissenters, you can imagine the outcry from the US and the European Parliament about stifling debate and freedom of expression and all the rest. I mean, what we said was that the list was disappointing but unsurprising given the internal suppression of dissenting voices, which the Ukrainian government has been responsible for, imprisoning journalists, shutting down opposition political parties, eliminating trade union rights, all of these very, very repressive measures. And then they devise this international list, which was constructed under offices directly answerable to Zelensky himself. Now, obviously, Mick is raging that he's not on the list, and it really shows the weakness of the Ukrainian secret services that they missed him. He has a live complaint in there at the moment, actually. What does he have to do to get on the list? But I know, I mean, joking aside, it is sinister, and it's not nice. I mean, they have a list out at the moment that young girl, the journalist, the daughter of the Russian religious leader who was friendly with Putin, was on that list. She was blown up in the car bomb, and I believe the list had after it kind of eliminated, as if all people on these lists are kind of legitimate targets. And when we see the proliferation of arms which have gone across borders, unaccountable by these Ukrainian authorities, that's really horrible stuff. But at its basis, first of all, well, the two things that I said are demonstrably true. Ordinary people in Europe are most definitely suffering, and in Russia and Ukraine, and it is a proxy war, whether they like it or not. But even if I was wrong, that's my opinion. It's hardly a crime to go on a list for that. So there's a lot of sinister stuff about it. And
does that intimidate you enough to? I mean, it must in some way, in the back of your mind, somewhere, you must be thinking, maybe I shouldn't speak out again on this. No, it's an intimidation, isn't it, of your right to speak?
Well, we've said this. I mean, we would be used to being vilified before, but nothing on the scale of what we've been through now. But I have to say the content and the edge in the criticism that we're receiving on this is a bit sinister, and it's a bit more left field. I mean, we're not the types to go whinging, oh, I've been abused on social media for me, or any of that nonsense. But I would be untrue in not acknowledging that some of the hate mail that we've got this time has a really dangerous, violent, and actually incredibly sexist undercurrent to it that I've never witnessed in whatever 35 years of political life. Using threats of sort of, a lot of, Putin's whore, or go out and get raped by Russians, and we know where you are, you ugly cow, we will hunt you down. All this type of stuff. Bit extreme now, but no, it doesn't put us off. It's a short answer, but it is pretty vitriolic, isn't it?
No, I mean, it emphasizes to us how it's even more important that we speak fearlessly, without fear or favor. We've been tired as Russians, Putin's puppets, but they actually haven't got one shred of evidence in 10 years of us ever saying a good word about the right-wing neoliberal that Putin is. But what we're doing is we've actually been trying to work for peace, and we've been pointing out the hypocrisy of the European Union's position, where they, in actual fact, they made no effort to try and avoid the war taking place in the first place. They have made no effort at initiating dialogue or diplomacy since the war started. And this isn't normal behavior. But for us, it's clearly a case of them taking their orders from the US. We're more than happy that the war is going on. And for those making out that Clare's comment about this being a proxy war was an inaccurate statement, I'd ask them to listen to Jens Stoltenberg, the boss of NATO. He came in before the European Parliament. I was at the committee and I was questioning him, and he boasted that NATO, you must remember, he said, NATO had been involved in Ukraine since 2014. We've been training, we've been supporting, we've been arming them. We've done a lot of work already. Now, this is for the words of the NATO boss. And for anyone then to actually suggest for a second that this is not a proxy war, come on, what planet are they living on? And just to go back to Clare's point about if the Chinese put up a list like the Ukrainians have done, in actual fact, the Chinese stupidly actually put 5 MEPs on a blacklist for I don't know whether they went to Taiwan or what they did, but anyway, they upset the Chinese. And the Chinese actually made heroes of them. It was a stupid thing for the Chinese to do. But the European Parliament went apoplectic about these 5 wonderful MEPs being put on a list by China. And the place was in uproar. But there wasn't a word to be said about any of the MEPs that were put on the Ukrainian list. I mean, once more, we're looking at hypocrisy being badly exposed in the European Union. And while von der Leyen said yesterday in her State of the Union address, if there's a word for courage, it has to be Ukraine. Well, I heard Clare Daly saying shortly afterwards, if there's a word for hypocrisy, it has to be the European Union.
Right. Now, look, I've wanted to get to you as well, Mick, because you've been given flack for being a propaganda. I saw this from some who know what they are. It says, you're the most, I always say Clare Daly, spelled your name wrong, and Mick Wallace are the most quoted EU MP on Chinese media.
Yeah.
The Chinese YouTube apparently loves Clare Daly and Mick Wallace. So someone's trying to sort of smear you as a Chinese propagandist as well. It's relentless, isn't it? Anytime you question the narrative that the EU or NATO have provided us, you are given that kind of smear. But I wanted to ask you, because this is something that came out in Morning Star this week, which is it's Chinese loans allow developing countries to avoid IMF-imposed structural reform. Chinese loans to countries facing financial ruin, including Sri Lanka, Argentina, and Pakistan, mean Beijing is increasingly seen as an alternative to the IMF. The Chinese are supporting countries in dire need, and the IMF is turning their nose up at them. Yet you're being accused of being a propagandist. I mean, what is this, the situation with these countries? I mean, I've seen you speak about this in the Parliament there.
Yeah, look, I mean, the European Union seems to have a bit of a problem with the Chinese at the moment. Obviously, so have the Americans. And obviously, as you know, the Americans have been claiming that Chinese are a threat to their security. But really what they're saying is, what they mean is that China is a threat to their financial supremacy. China hasn't dropped a bomb on anyone in 40 years, and I don't think they're a threat to the security of the people of the US or to the people of Europe. But in relation to your article there, the truth be told now, the Chinese are very active in Africa. Now, they don't send in their army and the guns and the bombs, but they've been building infrastructure in order to gain access to minerals that they want. And they've been, it's more like a bartering system, but the Chinese have spent a lot of money on infrastructure in Africa, and the Chinese are extracting a lot of mineral wealth out of Africa. Now, are they paying a fair price for it? I don't know. Are they paying more than the Europeans? I don't know. But what is pretty obvious at this stage, that the Chinese are making more progress in Africa than the US, the Canadians, and the Europeans are at present. And that used to be the way. The Chinese are making great progress. They seem to have an approach that's more attractive to the Africans. And we've been putting it to the European Union. You know what now? If you want to do business in Africa, you want to be questioning your approach, because sadly, too often, we still approach African countries with a colonial mindset. We haven't really moved away from it. Now, while most of these African states got their independence in 1960 and the couple of years after that, the truth be told, colonialism never stopped. And you take, for example, the Sahel, in the sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, the French and the EU have had over 20,000 troops down there as part of a so-called UN mission. But I mean, and it was supposedly fighting jihadists that actually were more or less kind of grew out of the crisis in Libya. Many of them brought there by NATO. to destabilize and destroy Libya back in 2011 and afterwards. But even others then, jihadists moved south from Libya, went into the Sahel region, and the place is in turmoil for the last number of years. But since 2013, you have over 5,000 French troops down there, and you have 15,000 troops from other European supposedly fighting the jihadists. Now, the main reason they're down there is in order to protect French access to uranium in the region, mainly in Niger. France produces 75% of its power from nuclear, and 50% of all France uranium is coming from Niger. So the soldiers are not down there for the good of the health of the locals, because poverty rates is above 70%. And remember, while these countries have terrible poverty problems, these are not poor countries. They are exploited countries, and they're not being allowed to gain the fruits of their own wealth, because they're being robbed from them by the likes of European member states who are still behaving like colonialists. And if they're worried about China making more progress than them in many other parts of Africa at the moment, well, they need to take a serious look at themselves.
It does seem to be that China is giving a better deal, as it were. Now, our view is that they should be all shove off out of Africa and allow the Africans to develop their own natural resources for themselves. So we don't care whether they're Chinese, European, Russian colonialists, or Russian hired mercenaries through the Wagner Group or whatever. All of those capitalist economies, because they all are all down there trying to exploit Africa. But it does seem that the Chinese deal is far better than the European deal and the attachments with conditionality with the IMF and all of this nonsense that the Chinese engage in. Debt trap diplomacy, like that they tie these countries, is not true, has been absolutely disproved. They give a better deal. We don't think they're doing it for the good of their health. The Chinese are getting something out of it as well, but they're offering a much better deal for Africa. And that's why the EU is going mad over that, because they're losing influence over their former colonies. And they're going, oh, these people are being bought. They're our values and we're going down to bring democracy. No, you're not. You're going down to take the resources out the way you used to do it before, throw them a few crumbs and then exploit them, you know?
We had a spokesperson from the US State Department at our Foreign Affairs Committee there a couple of months back, and he was giving out yards about the Chinese, and the Chinese are doing this and the Chinese are doing that, and they're a real threat to us and we have to watch the Chinese. And I said to him, when I got my chance to question him, I said, well, listen, I said, do you not think, I said, that your biggest problem with the Chinese is that in actual fact today, they're actually doing capitalism better than you are? Now, we're not fans of capitalism anyway, and capitalism, as far as we're concerned, is defunct and is no longer fit for purpose, whether it's Russian, American, European, or Chinese capitalism. But we're not going to solve the climate crisis. We're not going to deal with the massive challenges that we have around the environment at the moment unless we address the fact that capitalism is not fit for purpose. It's based on perpetual growth, and it's a race to the bottom forever, and we have to put an end to it.
Well, I just want to finish on what's going to happen in this country across the water with this energy bills crisis. I mean, the government here is not making any concession really at all to it. They're making people pay through the nose for energy. The next few months and probably years are going to be really difficult for people here and probably all over Europe. So, as you said, capitalism seems to have failed. What do you predict will come from this?
Well, it's always easier for people to know what they're against and what they're for, but I think it's sadly getting to the stage where people don't have the luxury of sitting at home and giving out. They have to even take to the streets, as it were. I mean, we see in the last 2 weekends, we've had massive protests in the Czech Republic, for example, against the cost of living and against the war. We've had a huge protest in France. There was a big kind of left-wing event in Paris last weekend, actually hosted by the French Communist Party, and one of their news, but 400,000 people attended that event. There are huge events going on. I mean, what's happening with the unions and the RMT in Britain, and that a lot of people are taking note that ordinary people cannot afford to live in the way in which the society has been run from. So they have to demand more wages, more supports and that. And I think we will see more protest activity, more getting together in that, and out of those meetings and organisations, I suppose people will try and grapple for a different type of government. It's not easy, but there isn't really another way. And when the establishment or the system has its back up against the wall, it's going to have to give concessions, but it'll be it or us. And it can't be us, because ordinary people can't afford to pay anymore.
Well, we've always said that change never comes from politicians, it comes from the people. And when the people are pinned like they're being done, like is happening at the moment with energy bills, it's hurting them. And they're seeing that the energy suppliers, the private companies, are not hurting. They're actually making more money than they ever made. And they're looking at having a government that are not prepared to see them cut their profits and actually contribute to helping people make ends meet. It's pretty blatant. And what that really means in the long term is that energy, and we should have known it before now, we may have, but more and more people are starting to realize this, but energy is a public good and it should be in public ownership. And if you allow the private sector, who their raison d'etre is making profit more and more and more, and if you are going to allow them to actually reef the general public, then you've got to get to a space where we've got to start making sure that our energy supply is state controlled, take it out of private hands. They've had it, they've abused it, they didn't behave responsibly, and we now need to change direction, and energy supply has to become into public ownership.
And I think, like, in the same way as like Irish people are inspired by looking at what's happening, they all love Mick Lynch, and they, you know, are getting into the Enough is Enough campaign, and people saying, here, we need something like that in Ireland. I do think there is going to be a change of government in Ireland. Sinn Féin will come to power. I'm not saying they're going to be a hugely radicalising force, but that will be completely different type of government, in the sense of, from our Civil War years, there will be a huge expectation of change in that. And I think that can have a knock on across the water as well. And as people grapple out of the current economic situation to find a way forward. So I think things are going to happen that never happened before, for good and bad. So we just have to keep pushing.
I mean, for many years, we've had a problem with our unions. Our unions sold out a long time ago. And when we look at England, we actually think there's more potential with their unions. And obviously, Mick Lynch is an absolute breath of fresh air. And we think there's potential for progress in that area. And the unions can play a really strong part there. And we wish that things changed in Ireland, where the unions actually started working for their members and for the general public, rather than being in cahoots with the powers that be. But definitely, it's a window of opportunity in Britain now, and hopefully the public go for it.
And just as we started with the Queen, who is unelected, we have an elected head of state in our president now. It's not great, a bit of a token role, but there was a survey about who you'd like to see as president about 2 months ago, and I think about 10% of people voted for Mick Lynch. So there you are.